Welcome to Sanity, a podcast by the New York Sun. My name is A.R. Hoffman, and every week, along with my co-host, Rebecca Sugar, we try to make sense out of the nonsense and bring a little bit of sanity to your week.
So, Ari, the quote of the week comes from Senator Eric Schmidt from Missouri. He spoke at the NatCon conference this week, and it's a nod to Labor Day, which was just this past Monday. He spoke about the H-1B visas, which have been debated in the news not too long ago. They're sort of a way for employers to hire temporarily foreign workers who have specialties in certain areas. A lot of Silicon Valley hires H-1Bs. And so this is what Senator Schmidt said. The H-1B visa was sold as a way to keep America globally competitive, but that's not how programs like H-1B have actually functioned. Instead, they've imported a vast new labor force from abroad, not to fill jobs Americans can't or won't do, but to undercut American wages, replace American workers, and transfer entire industries into the hands of foreign lobbies. While our trade agreements kneecap blue-collar workers in a slow-moving disaster decades in the making, abuse of the H-1B program is kneecapping white-collar workers right before our eyes. So, agree or disagree, there's debate on both sides of this, but I thought that was a very clear articulation of the call to reform the H-1B program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I lived out in Silicon Valley, it was almost a topic of conversation at your dinner table or over drinks, was just how reliant tech companies in particular were and are on that program. Okay, so we're going to start off our top stories of this a little bit shortened but still newsy Labor Day week. We're going to talk about some of the ongoing free speech issues in England, which Rebecca's been reporting on them on this program and just generally for what seems like a while, but it feels like maybe they passed a kind of tipping point or sort of critical mass this week. So we'll be all over that. We're also, as we're recording, RFK Jr. is testifying in Congress, so we'll pay a visit to sort of the CDC and Health and Human Services, see what's going on there. We had the kind of remarkable story of a Venezuelan boat being kind of obliterated, and I don't
think you can be kind of obliterated.
No, it was totally obliterated. It is no more. We'll talk about how that fits into the administration's overall immigration program, and then we have lots to get to on Make It Make Sense. We'll talk about the National Guard and the growing sort of question around constitutional and just political question around its deployment, and then we'll talk New York politics. We'll talk Middle East politics. We got all your bases covered this week.
Okay.
So, Rebecca, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with free speech in England or the lack thereof?
Sure. I mean, what is there to say? There's a lack thereof. I remember we talked about J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, going to the Munich conference. And
that was one of our first episodes.
Yeah, and sort of delivering that great speech, which I still love and have read to my kids, about what's happening to free speech in Europe. And look, this has been going on for years, many years. And it is sort of in people's awareness now. And it's so interesting that what was the tipping point in this last week was an attack on a comedian or a comedic writer. And it so often feels like when we go after the comedians, that's when things tend to break. It's fascinating, actually. But Graham Lynham, who's an Irish citizen, actually not a British citizen, landed at Heathrow and was arrested by 5 British police officers. He's now suing Metropolitan Police, and he was arrested for 3 tweets, 3 ex-posts. And they were, they weren't even really jokes, I guess. One of them sort of was. The other 2 were just his position on the transgender sort of ideology that he feels is overtaken all of us in the West, and that he feels no one's free to say anything about. And he was proven right because he was arrested for saying something about it. There was the suggestion in one of them that maybe he was making some kind of a threat, but it wouldn't rise, at least in America under First Amendment law, to anything even approaching a violation of.
And just in America, speech has to be really calling for violence. The famous analogy of yelling fire in a crowded theater as one benchmark, but that's a pretty high bar to meet.
It has to be very specific and imminent, all these things, and it didn't meet any of that standard. But they don't have that standard there, which is part of the problem. In the UK, they don't have a First Amendment. But why is it so animating now? I mean, this was just after a weekend of mass protests across the United Kingdom having to do with illegal immigration. But of course, in that domain too, you're not allowed to say anything about illegal migrants, rape across the UK, crime, anything, even just we don't want immigrants here. And so free speech has been clamped down on in every area of life. I think people are just fed up. And when you go after somebody as beloved as Graham Linehan and a comedian, you risk going too far. And I hope that this is the turning point. You have people going to jail in Britain all the time for speech, for holding up posters at protests, for praying silently in what they call buffer zones around abortion clinics. There was a famous case of Lucy Connolly, who spent 31 months in jail in the UK for talking about illegal immigration. Her tweets were, angry and mean and laced with bad language and all that, but that is not cause to put someone in jail. And I think at the same time, people who commit real crimes across the UK are not being put in jail. And so I think people have real cause to be fed up. And I just want to point out one particular thing that irritated me really about this the most was the reaction in the UK to this by some of the more traditional elitists in their government. The Green Party, one of the Green Party leaders, a guy named Zach Polanski, he said something that just drove me nuts. He said, "These are totally unacceptable tweets. I think it was proper to arrest him." And he invoked the fact that he's Jewish and he's experienced anti-Semitism. So two things really annoyed me. One is this...
And his politics are very far to the left.
Yeah,
he's one of the leader of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian.
Yeah, he's a Green Party guy.
Yeah.
But first of all, what does it mean that these comments are unacceptable, right? That sort of assumes that politicians get to decide what's acceptable and not acceptable in society. And it's just the most overused word, unacceptable. And I think we should strike it from, if we want any kind of censorship, should be that politicians should not say what speech is acceptable or unacceptable unless they're willing to really back up what they're willing to do about it if it is unacceptable, which this guy is. He thinks it's proper that Graham Linehan was arrested. And to invoke his Jewishness, that's the part that really irritated me, because I really feel strongly that Jews in America, in their fight against anti-Semitism, have made a terrible mistake, often make a terrible mistake, in leaning into the censorship lane, pretending that there is such a thing as hate speech and trying to criminalize it in order to save themselves from a very real problem. But where you end up is like Graham Linehan in the UK. You might save your child on campus this week from hearing bad words about Jews, but in a year or in 2 years, you might be arrested at JFK if there's another administration here who's not as sensitive to the rights of Americans to speak freely. So I really don't like the leveraging of his Jewish identity for this purpose.
Yeah, no, that's a great summary. A couple of things. I think one is, needless to say, comedians thrive off of social critique, off of being outrageous, off of being offensive, right? And broad strokes. See the renewed success of South Park here, which was popular when I was a kid, and now is hitting its stride. I think because of its willingness to challenge taboos, and conversely, see what happens when comedians are no longer offensive. See Stephen Colbert; they kind of become irrelevant, right? Boring and vanilla. So I think we want to preserve the ability to offend totally, I agree. I mean, even in a case where, as you said, where my politics line up differently, for example, England prescribing the Palestine Action Committee, which has become a big issue. And I couldn't have less sympathy for the Palestine Action Committee in either its methods or its rhetoric or its goals. But I kind of get the critique that arresting people for holding up a sign or sort of arresting people for, issuing a statement of support, is troubling for sure. So I think, as with any free speech issue, you have to be willing to go to bat on both sides for it.
it seems so basic. I mean, we've been talking about free speech in the United States forever. That was always the principle, right? That the speech that you hate the most is the speech that needs defending. I mean, all those sort of obvious things, and it feels like everybody just has mass memory loss about why we have free speech in the first place. And I don't know, it struck me also just this week, Malcolm Gladwell was doing an interview, and he sort of did a mea culpa about a couple of years ago where he was on a panel, and he sort of went along with the narrative that men should be allowed in women's sports. And he was saying in this current interview that he was ashamed of that, and he felt cowed into saying that. And you think, you're a journalist, a successful man, an author, a well-known person. If you're cowed, imagine how everyone else feels. But also, I don't think you have the right in your position to be cowed. I think it's more than just an apology that's needed from him. Like, he has to do something to fix this problem. It's not just that he didn't stand up for free speech, and he should have. It's that he of all people should have. And if he won't, no one will.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right in that it identifies, you kind of have what we're seeing in the UK, which is this kind of like the government's force behind censorship. I had a law professor who once said that, my contracts professor, is that even behind the most boring contract, the most kind of quotidian document review, if you go far enough behind it, there's the power of a gun, right? Because the government is enforcing it. And anytime the government enforces it, there's a show of force there. So that's kind of one category of suppression of speech. And then there's actually a former long ago editor of The Sun called, I think, social despotism, right? The way in which someone like Malcolm Gladwell, no government, no police officer was showing up at his door, but he wanted to be part of the cool kids, right? And he wanted to be like Malcolm Gladwell. And, one thing I observed during some of my time in academia was, there's this notion that, once you get tenure, you're sort of free to speak your mind, right? It's this kind of sense of once you have security, that's when you become courageous. But in fact, what I observed was that the people with tenure were the least courageous, right? They were, because maybe they were most invested in the system, or maybe they were a little bit older, or whatever. You can come up with lots of reasons, but it never seemed to work out that way, right? And so someone like Malcolm Gladwell, staff writer at The New Yorker, best-selling books, pop culture star, podcaster, right? And if anything, all those things were not liberating.
Right. It's a social currency, as you said, of being in that crowd was worth more than the integrity of the words that he would speak.
I mean, look at The New Yorker now, right? I mean, I think we spoke about it a little bit on this program. You have a staff writer who has tweets, that would have been, to the would have made Farrakhan blush. And then, you just have in the last day, just today, I think news broke that, Hassan Piker, who we've also spoken about in this program, is being invited to the New Yorker Festival. And, at what level and it's not about, you can say, well, Ari and Rebecca, maybe you're being hypocritical. You're saying Hassan Piker shouldn't be able to speak. It's not that. The question is, why is there no one else at the New Yorker who says that this is wrong, right?
Well, it's about who's enforcing, who's on the enforcement end, right? Free speech is not entirely free socially. Meaning, I remember the Dixie Chicks once, right, came out and said something. It might have been against President Trump or one of their President Bush at one of their concerts. And their record sales plummeted. And then they went on, I think, Oprah Winfrey, and were weeping about how, I thought we had free speech. You do have free speech, but you also have to pay the consequences socially for it. And that's fair. But the government should not be enforcing your speech and the price you're going to pay or not pay for it. That's the difference, right? And so free speech is not free entirely, but it should be free of government oppression.
Right. It's not free from consequences.
Right.
Okay. So there's been a lot of news out of RFK and Health and Human Services. There was the resignation or the firing of the head of the CDC. Kind of a lot of upheaval on the personnel end. What do you make of things, Rebecca? How do you think we should start, or how are you evaluating kind of RFK's tenure so far?
Well,
we might disagree.
I don't. Yeah, I think we probably do disagree. But like, it's such a funny question. Like, what do I make of it? I think I've seen too many grown men in like BDSM outfits in the last few weeks for my,
Yeah.
I never thought that
That's
I could
a good
see
place to
Glenn
start.
Greenwald and one of the heads of the
Right.
CDC sort of dressed like that. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't get past that. It's like, what is actually going on? I don't know. Okay, to more serious things.
Fortunately, we're not going to show images on this tape. We're not going to illustrate.
Nobody needs to see that if they haven't seen it already. I don't know. Let me ask you
this.
What RFK Jr. has done. I think he's. I think it's sort of. Here's what I think. I think it's unbelievable to me, whether you like his policies or dislike them, to pretend that upending the system that just took us through COVID and did what it did to the country and the world is somehow crazy or insane or that everything that has come before doesn't warrant a second look. To me, that's gaslighting in the first order. Mm-hmm. Even if RFK Jr. is wrong in his particular prescriptions, that the whole system needed upending seems clear and obvious to me, and I don't understand why people think that we shouldn't want that.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think this is an area where we disagree. I think this is the area of the administration that is, to me, the least defensible in terms of policy.
Like which ones bother you the most?
Well, for example, the news out of Florida this week that not children will require no vaccinations. I wrote the quote down from the Florida Surgeon General about vaccinations. Every last one of them is wrong and drips with disdain and slavery.
Yeah, I wrote that down too.
Craziness. This goes far beyond COVID vaccines. This is every kind of vaccine.
Well, he was referring to the mandates, not the actual vaccines, but I just want to be clear.
Setting us back. There was an editor at the Wall Street Journal, Bob Bartley, who said, on the whole, modernity is good for you. And I think that's largely true. I mean, these medicines are an extraordinary, stupendous achievement when you think of humanity lived for millennia at prey of diseases. And we still do for many, but many we don't. And why we would want to reverse that is just strange to me.
But can you see, at least, you could feel that way, but could you also see why many people don't feel that way? Because just this week we were told that Tylenol might be causing autism. A report just came out. We were told by the Pfizer documents that they knew that it caused myocarditis in young men, and they didn't tell the public. So even if the answer to that is not get rid of all vaccines, we have to be able to understand why people are now not believing the experts and want some kind of change. It's not that everyone's gone mad. It's that the systems seem to have gone mad. No one seems to have recognized that or paid a price for it. And then those same people are telling you that you're mad for having questioned it.
Well, I understand. And I understand the political potency. Most polls put RFK actually as one of the more popular members of the administration. So there's no doubt that there's a political constituency and some support. I just think, what we've heard from like this woman, Susan Menares, who was literally a Trump appointee and confirmed by the Senate, is that, it's becoming believing is a strange word, but being a proponent of vaccines in any capacity is becoming a disqualification under RFK. I think that's insane. I think this is worse than we could have imagined.
Okay, actually. But I first of all, I think it was very imaginable because everyone knew where RFK Jr. stood on vaccines. But isn't this the way the government's supposed to work? Right? If you work for someone in government and they hold a view that you think is insane, you leave. Right. And so what is so shocking about the CDC employees leaving?
When RFK secured confirmation, he didn't say that he didn't believe in vaccines. I mean, there was a lot of, I think, kind of like blurring of where he actually really stands.
He and Thune went back and forth that precisely because they were trying to find trying to find a way to allow him to be confirmed, but knowing full well how he personally at least feels. And so I don't think people are totally shocked that he's not. And he hasn't banned all vaccines. That was just in Florida. But anyway, I'm just saying the issue about the CDC just strikes me as funny. Like at the end of the day, if I work at the New York Sun and the editorial pages are putting out things that I just find outrageous, I would just leave, right? And so same with the CDC. So I don't see anything terrible happen to Susan Manaras. I think she left a job that she didn't feel she could stay in, and that's what's supposed to happen, no?
Yeah, no, I understand that. But the question would be kind of like, what happened here? I mean, why is someone who was endorsed by the administration and confirmed, and then you have all of a sudden senators saying, wait a second, we voted for this person, why is she out after a month? I mean, I think that speaks to like a personnel issue. But on the broad strokes, I mean, there's some reports now that there's going to be an effort to ban the COVID vaccine altogether. We've gone, I think, in a lot of these cases from like, well, people should have the choice to like, there's not going to be a choice.
Well,
really.
They're banning the mandate for it, right? It's not that if you want that product, you can't access it. It's that it's not required of you anymore, which I am fully in favor of. Yeah. I think based on what we already know about the damages done by that vaccine and mRNA technology and what we don't know yet.
Would you cancel those $500 million in mRNA research altogether?
I would. I don't know is the answer, because I don't know what other use cases there are for that technology, but I would absolutely cancel any mandate until we fully understand what just happened to our country and the world for using it.
I mean, we might. I think we'd sort of disagree on the in aggregate. Was the vaccine a positive or a negative? It seems to me overall it was a positive, but the Florida case is interesting because it goes beyond just COVID. I mean, like if I have a child, the idea that the child and again, I don't have children. I want to be realistic about that, but like the idea that my child is sitting next to a student in class who isn't vaccinated for the measles is insane.
So this was
it's really insane.
This was interesting. Like, this part of the conversation is interesting to me because California, Washington, and Oregon responded to this Florida announcement by saying we're going to get together and discuss what our policies would be. And one imagines that it would be quite the opposite of what Florida just announced on vaccines. And I think it speaks to this idea of like federalism and the idea that states decide and populations decide how they want to be governed, what laws they want to live under to some degree, and you find your place. And I think it's sort of interesting. It's happening in so many areas of life now in our country where people are kind of, breaking into little, they're hearkening back to the old idea of federalism and going back to the idea that states get to decide how their own populations live.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so you wouldn't live
Brandeis called that
in
laboratories of federalism. I guess though it's like if we kind of would like double click on that a little bit, like even the question is yes, there can be different policies, but the question is like at a certain level there are baselines. For me, like preventing, disease, communicable disease, when we know there are, medicines that do that and not doing it comes pretty close to saying, well, don't have speed limits or right? Or
no, I think that's a fair argument, but I think I'm just asking everyone to hear it not just as its own argument, but an argument being made not a few years after we were told that a certain intervention was being used to stop the spread of a communicable deadly disease. And then we soon found out that not only didn't it stop the spread of that communicable disease, but it might have actually, and did, in my view, harm a lot of people on top of it. So even if your point is correct, one can understand why many people would not be open to that argument at this particular moment. And it sort of strikes me as funny that the establishment doesn't appreciate
when you have
that.
This widespread suspicion, with what is the role of government? Is it to amplify and aid and abet that suspicion? Is it to rechannel it in responsible way? Right? I mean, just because people are feeling like,
that would require accountability first, which we haven't yet seen, I think. If you want that, and I think we all want that, I would even want that, to channel it in a responsible way, I think we have to see accountability for the people who did what they did. But kids should still get the measles shots. I don't get it. Okay, let's go to our Make It Make Sense section, and we'll maybe kind of like sneak in a little bit of Venezuela in there. Okay, so
the National Guard issue, Trump suffered a setback in L.A. with his effort to sort of use the National Guard there, similar to how it's been used in D.C. D.C. situation is different, as we talked about, because D.C. has a different status. Mm-hmm. It's also somewhat strange because as of, I think, yesterday, the mayor was like, this is great. Like, let's do it indefinitely. But then after the LA decision came down, all of a sudden,
they saw an opening.
Like, they saw an opening. Let's challenge it.
Just clarify for us the LA decision, because I think I understood it that no new troops, that troops that are presently there can remain.
Right.
But he's not, it's illegal to add more.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly. And there are not that many there. I mean, it was a fairly limited deployment. I think it's around maybe 300 or so.
Why would that be legally? Why would it be legal to have troops there but not more troops? What's the distinction?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of bedrock question here is like, can federal troops be used for domestic law enforcement? That's sort of like the crux of the question. We had I thought a pretty good editorial that said yes, that actually like the president, in as much as the president is tasked with ensuring that the laws are executed, right? That like that broad grant of power is enough to justify the use of federal troops. But there is an argument the other way, and that is that that it's overstepping the bounds, that the police power is given to the states. It's not enjoyed by the federal government in like a free floating way. And
but
also
this
the
LA
idea,
ruling feels like it's not neither one or the other. It's sort of saying both. It's saying he does have the right because they're allowing the ones who are there to stay, but he doesn't have the right to send in more. So what would be the theory under which you're not allowed to send in more if you're already allowed to send in the first batch?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's sort of this kind of blurry line, because I think most people would agree if there is a domestic disturbance, if they are needed, the president can deploy them. The question is a little bit like, have we met that that benchmark, and do we read that literally? So the judge who made the LA decision, Charles Breyer, who's the younger brother of the former Supreme Court justice, says this is not a rebellion. Like, okay, it's disorder, it's crime, but that seems broadly right. I mean, a rebellion you think is like a political, but the question is like, if the local police are not demonstrating their ability to contain it, is that grounds to sort of supplement it? And this all goes all the way back to 2020 and the debates about the Black Lives Matters riot and that Tom Cotton op-ed and the New York Times and all that stuff, right? This has sort of been debated for a while. And the truth is, if you go into Grand Central Station in here in New York or Penn Station, you see National Guard people, and they're just kind of standing around. But I grew up seeing them, right? So it never struck me as like crazy, to see NYPD and National Guard.
I'm begging
folks.
them to come to New York, especially if Zoran Mamdani becomes mayor. Please. But okay, but what do you think legally will happen? It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and what do you think they will decide?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to say. I think DC again is a special case, so I think that's where Trump is strongest. I think that's why he started there. I think a lot of this will be the administration sort of figuring out, how much it wants to do on this. I mean, how long are these deployments going to be? Is it worth fighting? But it's just a great question. He's already saying Chicago's next. And like you said, like it wouldn't shock me if New York also with a Mamdani win becomes a target. I think a target,
not
a target, but a destination,
a recipient of a gift.
A destination. I think most folks indeed. It doesn't seem like they've precipitated riots or pushback. I mean, you had the sandwich guy, which we talked about, but other than that, we'll see. Let me just quickly. On the legal front, talk about the Venezuela situation. So we had two kind of big pieces of news. One is an appellate court ruled that for the moment, Trump can't use the Alien Enemies Act to deport people. Again, part of the thinking is like, this is not really an invasion. Trump says it is. The court says it's not. That'll definitely go to the Supreme Court this term, so stay tuned for that. And then while that was happening, we have Trump simultaneously putting a bounty on Maduro's head, $50 million. Good work if you can get it. And then and blowing up a boat allegedly full of drug gang members in the high seas.
Tren de
Aragua, which is the gang at the center of the Alien MS Act too. So it's interesting. We're kind of moving in this zone of like, is this law enforcement? Is this like foreign policy, right? And it's looking more and more like foreign policy. An interesting question, Rebecca, will be, will the Supreme Court defer to Trump because it's starting to look more like foreign policy, which is where the president has maximum authority.
Just on that question of foreign policy, I just wanted to add that, while this is an issue of drugs and fentanyl and all that, it is also an issue of foreign policy in terms of maintaining American supremacy in this hemisphere. I think this is really about China. And, we already have countries in South America like Argentina and El Salvador that are sort of moving into the sort of Western hemisphere's kind of sense of values and ideology and alignment. And I feel like this is maybe a message to China that, another country could fall. And we're starting to build a bloc in South America that aligns with American interests. And I think the real message here is, I hope it's about, getting rid of lots of fentanyl that have been killing, hundreds of thousands of Americans. But I also hope it's a message to China that you can't come into our backyard and not meet resistance.
Yeah, I mean, as far ago as the Monroe Doctrine from 1823, right? This idea that, the hemisphere is sort of America's backyard and we need to exert our influence. You could also look, I think, at the sort of promise to use, the military in Mexico as a similar understanding that this is not a kind of, as you said, just a law enforcement or a border control issue, but really a question of, territorial, like creating these kind of buffer zones or just, sort of showing who's boss.
Yeah, it's our neighborhood.
It's our neighborhood. We've seen that, it's like any neighborhood, one bleeds into the next. I mean, as you said, the fentanyl, immigration, all these questions. And you could say that I think for a long time, presidents, both Democrats and Republicans, have really ignored this hemisphere.
Tremendously.
And it's not as sexy maybe, or it doesn't feel as dramatic as like the Middle East or Asia or Europe or whatever. But
the illegal immigration question, right? The migration from all around the world through South America into Central America and up into the United States, and the Chinese are running a lot of that. I mean, the interests in South America are many, and the harms to the United States when we ignore that part of the world are many.
One question I have on the China front is I don't quite get this like rift with India at the moment. It seems to me as like we're pushing them straight into the arms of China. There was that big conference with Xi, and I just think India to me seems like a natural American ally, like both economically, culturally, in terms of their anti-terrorism stance. I don't know. So we'll see. Well, that's a relationship to watch. Arbeni Avni had some really good reporting on that this week. Although to be fair, India has long kind of played that game of kind of keeping one foot in like the West and the other in the like third world non-aligned movement, going all the way back to independence. So it's kind of a strange actor that way. Okay, why don't we do our sunlight? I'll start off, and this is going to be maybe kind of, Rebecca's going to scoff at me, but it's just a little bit of a defense of Mayor Adams as he maybe eyes
and
the
exits. And he needs one,
as he eyes the exits, this guy has a approval rating in the single digits. He's kind of, reporting this week has suggested that talks are pretty advanced for him to kind of get a job offer from Washington, from the administration, to move out, to help Cuomo. It's kind of unclear. Is that because Trump and Cuomo like each other? Or is it because Trump and Adams like I can't quite figure out the sort of personal dynamics here. You'd think from one end Trump would want Mamdani to win. You know what I mean? Like I don't quite get where the political and personal calculus meet each other with
John
all this.
McLaughlin, who we interviewed a few weeks ago, actually just said yesterday that people who say that are just buying that sort of political nonsense. Like Trump does not want him to win. But one could be forgiven for thinking that there's a lot of benefit in it for him if he does.
Yeah, but I think actually Trump likes both Adams and Cuomo. I mean, I think he's known Cuomo for 40 years, and Adams, I think obviously they get along really well. So who knows? But and the jobs Adams is interviewing for, an interviewer, don't especially seem, we were talking about this off air, like super sexy. It's like a mid-level HUD administrator.
Right. But you had a great idea.
No, he should be our ambassador to Turkey. There's no question about it. He could thrive. Adams on the Bosphorus. But anyway, I think actually he's getting a pretty bad rap. I don't quite understand the sort of universal disdain. The numbers show by every metric crime is down. Now you could say it's still too high, but it's showing real progress. You could you could give Jessica Tisch credit. That's fine. But I don't think he's that terrible a mayor. I mean, I think like it could be a lot worse.
It has been a lot worse.
It has been a lot worse. Just look at his predecessor. Yes. You know, I think, you know, it seems to me like trash seems less gross. You know, he's had success on the rat front. People make fun of him, but I think that's made a big difference. By any metric since 2020, 21, 22, crime, murder, there was a single murder over July 4th weekend for the first time in recorded memory. So listen, I'm not, you know, Eric Adams isn't the hill I'm going to die on, but
his
he's getting short shrift here.
His real crime was sort of working with President Trump, wasn't it? That's what he's paying for, nothing else.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I just think that when, you know, the history books are written, I think his reputation will improve, especially if Mamdani's next. So, you know, just a little sunlight for Eric Adams. He's not going to win. He's probably going to be out in ways that will feel like even more pathetic. But, you know, he wasn't all bad. You know, he was a friend to the Jewish community. He was pro-Israel. He, you know, I think took crime pretty seriously, or as seriously as a Democratic mayor of New York can. So, I don't know. The report card is mixed, but I don't think it was all bad.
Okay. I'm sure he appreciates the pity, Ari. My Sunlight is just a story that I think is worth watching. It's HUD Secretary Scott Turner, who put the word out to 2,000 public housing agencies this past week that they need to report back to HUD all of the private information, including immigration status, of Section 8 recipients. And Section 8 is a sort of a rent subsidy program that's meant to be for, you know, vets and people who can't afford homes and people who are disabled. Now, immigration status is already required in the application for Section 8, but I think the message here by HUD is that they don't really believe that the states are taking that seriously and eliminating those who don't have proper immigration status in the United States. And so we're paying for a lot of people's rent who don't even belong here in the first place. So I think it's a great step forward. I'm really excited to see what he comes up with, what the data is on that. It's more than 2 million households in America that receive Section 8 funding. How many of them really live in another country? And maybe they could pass that rental support on to people who actually are citizens of the United States.
That's a good one to watch. It reminds me a little bit of one of our first episodes. We interviewed Naomi Schaefer-Riley about the foster care system, and I remember talking to her about, you know, the intersection between state, you know, data collection and federal oversight, and a lot of these numbers and just sort of information really live in the states, right? And so this is another example of sort of trying to kind of align those.
It's just sort of doged the whole system. Okay. Sunburn.
So my sunburn is the credulity of the international media with respect to Israel. We've spoken about this before. The latest example is the finding of the International Association of Genocide Scholars that Israel is committing genocide. Shocker. This was trumpeted all over the world. Every publication sort of said this was, you know, ironclad. Cracks first starting emerging in this story when you had some people who were in this organization who said, hey, there wasn't really a vote on this, or, you know, what percentage of members really, came to this conclusion. It seemed pretty low, and you said, okay, this is another example of when it comes to Israel, standards are changed, shortcuts are taken, bias pervades the system, and then it's collapsed altogether in the last day or so, with the idea that anyone could be a member of anyone could be a genocide scholar. Right. You can be a genocide scholar. You could be a genocide. Emperor Palpatine, Cookie Monster, dog profiles. I mean, it's just $30 and you're a genocide scholar. An overwhelming number of members of this organization live in Iraq. Yes. I mean, I didn't really know that was a center of genocide scholarship. Yes. Just utter clown show, clown car, and so little accountability. When it comes to Israel, it's lie first, and then check later. This is another example of the way in which standards are unfairly applied to Israel to create a fake reality. We talked on this program about the use of photographs that were of children that had other pre-existing conditions to create the impression of a widespread famine. This is the genocide accusation. I've been on this for months, that this is a core of the kind of libel against Israel. It's the surest tell that someone is acting in bad faith, as if they use the word genocide. But it's not only that. There was just before we went on air, there was this testimony from this former GHF humanitarian guy that this child was shot. Aguilar, lo and behold, the kid's fine and healthy. I mean, it's just when it comes to Israel,
he gave that testimony, this Aguilar, with such a straight face.
It was
One was almost tempted to believe him, right? Twice he went on Tucker Carlson and sort of talked about it in such detail as though he were there and you could smell the gunpowder. It felt so real. That's the horrifying fact about it. It was completely untrue.
It's totally, and it's just, you understand the seduction of a blood libel, the seduction of these stories that fall apart, and no one is helped by them. And at the first glance of scrutiny, they collapse into dust. And so we can talk about the reality in Gaza. That's fine, but it's a joke. It's really a joke, and the way in which these are bad joke, and the way in which these lies about Israel are believed and laundered by the media with no fact checking or scrutiny is a scandal. It's really a scandal.
Okay, my sunburn is just my own personal sort of outrage over UN week. It hasn't begun yet. It starts on the 9th, but the pregame has clearly started, and you see a lot of those black cars with the sirens kind of making way for whichever dictator is in town with 12 wives and bad intentions, and I have to get out of the way or wait in traffic for that person. It angers me every year. It's the worst time of year to be in this city.
Rebecca and I are both in the neighborhood, and so we see it firsthand.
Even when like the French ambassador or leaders from countries that we're supposed to like, that enrages me even more because I can't even sort of fully say how much I hate that they get to hold me up from getting to wherever I need to go. So I don't know. My sunburn is just general annoyance at the UN, at UN week, and at New York traffic this time of year. And I think that like Chicago would be a great place to have UN week, and the UN itself. And our city's not big enough to take all these people in. And so out with them all.
Yeah. Amen to that. All right, Rebecca, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay.